Nimitz instructed his guys, and yeah, Rocheford and Leighton basically convinced Nimitz and then Admiral King that what was going to happen was that Midway was going to be attacked. And yeah, not much they could do about it, except, except for whatever you can come up with. Well, what he came up with was, like I said, he was going to be there. Unfortunately, Bull Halsey is the admiral of the Enterprise, I do believe, had a terrible case, a terrible skin rash. I believe it was, oh hell, I can't even remember the name of it, but it was basically potentially deadly. So he's grounded. Got put in a hospital. But Bull Halsey, depicted here as a guy who's probably just that aggressive, and yeah, you get the point. He appointed a guy who was not like him at all. Smart, but not nearly as aggressive. Yeah. Enter Admiral Spruance. Admiral Spruance was going to be in charge once they left Pearl Harbor. And you're talking about, you know, no communications whatsoever. They're going radio silent. Um, yeah. And they plan on to be there. So they were. They were actually north of Midway. And they had three carriers and two separate task groups. I think it was 16 and 17, maybe 17 and 18. Yeah. And they started as soon as they figured out that where the carriers were, approximately after they got sightings from I believe, a Catalina float plane or several over time. Even though those sightings only never indicated more than two carriers at a time, and that was kind of the one of the issues was, the U.S. military thought that the Japanese thought like them. They would never put all four carriers together. They were looking for two separate task groups. However, the Japanese, you know, by plan and by doctrine, had zero issue with putting four carriers together. And why not in the particular case where you don't have anything to fear? At least that's what you think. So all these piecemeal attacks keep coming in, and they're coming in low and slow. And they're from let me see here. Yeah, here's a good depiction of it. How effective this would be. This we'll say that this was the Devastator, I believe was the name of it. Uh, that is the U.S. Navy's torpedo bomber. It was about this effective. It was about as effective as a biplane, except I guess the torpedo that actually dropped was even less effective than that. They literally, when they were fortunate enough to hit something, they were known not to blow up. However, it doesn't stop the U.S. military from kicking them out there because, hopefully those were just rumors, and hopefully the good ones are the ones that hit the ships, and they didn't have anything else. So the Navy was really throwing everything they could at this point. But imagine how effective that is versus, yes, my really poorly put together Japanese Zero. Um, these were these were the stuff at the time. I mean, there's a different S word I could use, but yeah, versus pretty much everything in the U.S. arsenal up to this point. The Zero is far more. It was faster. It could climb higher. It was far more maneuverable. About the only downside it had was, well, they were not very well armored at all. They didn't have self-sealing fuel tanks, so when you were lucky enough to hit them, there was a very good chance you were putting these things out of commission. However, the U.S. Navy didn't have much in the way of anything that could hit them um, without much luck at that time. However, there was a strategy coming that was going to change that. However, it wasn't going to be changed by the Devastator, which, again, you could say is just really not devastating at all. Um, Sort of a misnomer name. The Combat Air Patrol, which was comprised of Zeros off the decks of the carriers, as they were waiting for the return from Tominaga's strike on Midway. Um, yeah, so they shredded. They absolutely shredded. Uh, well more than 80% of everything that was coming in. Nothing was touching these carriers at all. What? Yeah, it was ugly. There were some bombs that were kind of bracketing whenever. Yeah, there was a bomber that it almost hit a ship. We don't know because all the people on it died, but yeah, there was nothing. There was nothing at all. However, it was becoming increasingly clear that these were coming from carriers, and as soon as Nagumo had his sighting, he was ready to get some planes up in the air and start taking them out. However, it's not that easy. Like I said, carriers can only do one thing at a time. Well, they were doing it. They were trying to recover Tominaga's return flight from his attack at Midway. That was what they were supposed to be doing next. And Japanese doctrine indicated that the best way to strike by far is in a heavy, concentrated force. With all of your force, and you strike coordinatedly between the dive bombers, you have your torpedo bombers, and you have your air cover, comprised of fighters. That way, you use your full complement and you inflict the most damage possible. That was doctrine. So they were waiting to recover those planes before they could launch their own attack. Well, even after they had done that, let's say they recovered Tominaga's flight, they kept taking these piecemeal attacks. And it was usually these low-flying Devastators not coming in with any fighter cover whatsoever, and they were ripping them apart. I mean, the Japanese planes were absolutely ripping them apart. It wasn't even close. With lower numbers, they were just ripping them apart. Nothing was coming close to the carriers at this point. There was one guy that he went in the drink and he survived. I believe he was Ensign George Gay, I believe was his name. He went in the drink and he said he saw everything that happened ultimately. And, you could take that for what it's worth. I don't know how credible that is, how much he would have been seeing from bobbing up and down in the water and trying to protect his head, and these carriers were all moving, changing directions, trying to get out of the way of things, and they were all traveling to I find it highly unlikely that he saw much of anything. Just go to a swimming pool one day and put your hands over your eyes, over them, and tell me how much you can see. Now imagine, trying to see things 20 miles away in waves. I don't think he saw that much. However, I'm sure it was a great story to tell, and he was alive to tell it. So good on him. He was far more of a hero than me. I question how much he actually saw, because he said he saw what ultimately was the most famous 5 minutes in all naval aviation history, if not military history. And one of the reasons I'm doing this. So all the while, the Combat Air Patrol is flying around at low altitude, taking out these piecemeal attacks, and they're trying to put together an attack on the carriers they now know are in the area. These guys that ambushed them. They keep sending these crappy attacks, but while it's not having any effect, what it is doing is delaying severely Nagumo's ability to actually mount a counterattack. He can't get his planes out from the hangars because, they need to spot them. But you're not going to spot planes while you're being attacked and you're taking evasive action. So yeah. And then, they have to rearm back to ship-based missiles after they found out. So there's this huge conundrum. And on top of that now, because of the rearming and then the rearming, there's torpedoes everywhere, there's bombs everywhere. They weren't able to put them back in the proper casing, where the armor stores them properly. They're kind of stored up against the bulkheads. There's all kinds of firepower going on, switching. Yeah, and they're just not able to. There's not able to spot planes while they're being attacked, and all this stuff is going on, and then out of nowhere, like I said, the most famous 5 minutes in naval aviation history is coming. So, one squadron from the USS Enterprise of dive bombers led by McCluskey. I forget his name, but it's McCluskey. And so, yeah, he's flying. He's going to where they were supposed to be. But like I said, they've moved. They're heading toward U.S. task force. They're trying to force this confrontation. This was the whole point of the Midway operation, and now they have their chance to destroy the carriers days earlier than intended. But there's a squadron coming in from this direction, and there's another squadron coming in from this direction. So now, almost completely by luck, by timing, by the lack of coordination and timing of the various squadrons coming off of the USS carrier, United States carriers. Yeah, you remember all those piecemeal attacks, right? Well, there was no fighters. There's still no fighters. There's no low level anything to go with these guys. So they're all off on their own. McCluskey gets lucky. He follows a trail of a freaking destroyer that had just been trying to take out one single U.S. sub that popped up in the middle of the damn. Great story. There's so much more to this story than I can do. But I'm not going to because it's already irritating to you at this point. But I'm going to continue. That's right. So, from high altitude dive bombers, which were by far the best planes that we had, insofar as carrier-based planes, the SBD dive bomber, again, beautifully painted by me. No, it's not good. But you see where I'm going with this. These things would go from like 2 miles high, roll over in the dive, come in virtually at 90 degrees. They say 70 degrees, but that's only because there's still lift in the wings. So you're still traveling forward, but they are essentially coming straight down. So they're coming in like this at their target from 2 miles high and release their weapons from 2,500 to 1,000 feet, depending on the size of the target, and hit it while it's moving. I want you to imagine the skills that takes, the balls that takes. The SBD dive bomber. Now, the combat air patrol, or the Zeros from these carriers that were supposed to be protecting them, they were all low, and they were taking out these crappy piecemeal attacks that didn't even have fighters with them, and they didn't see this coming at all. And so, in short order, we had one carrier on fire. We had 2 carriers on fire. We had 3 carriers on fire. The Kaga, the Akagi, and the Soryu, all 3 had been hit with at least 1,000-pound bombs, at least one. The Kaga had been hit with, I believe, six, if not more. The Akagi, at least according to Admiral Nagumo's after action report that I read, was hit twice. Once, and neither of them were considered critical. And the Soryu was hit, I believe, three times. So three carriers suddenly are all on fire. And I think, as one historian has said, World War II carriers are wonderfully flammable. I mean, that's a hell of a statement, isn't it? But evidently that was the case because all three fires started raging out of control. Secondary explosions went off. And before you know it, three carriers were not just on fire, not just with small holes. No, no, hell no. They were out of business. To the point where all three of those, I believe by the next day, if not the day after the next day, were all sunk by the Japanese to prevent them from being potentially patched up and hauled back to Pearl Harbor or whatever the United States would have done with them. Certainly they didn't want it falling in the hands of their enemy or anyone else for that matter. But that did leave one carrier for the Japanese. They were pissed, as you can imagine. Yeah, so they were finally able to launch, and launch they did. They got a coordinated attack against the Yorktown, and they hit it, I want to say three times. A torpedo, maybe two torpedoes, and maybe three bombs. They jacked it up pretty good. Now the Yorktown, man, it just got repaired. Fortunately, they already had all those mechanics on board. And they already had a lot of experience cleaning up that ship. So clean it up they did. And yeah. U.S., in the meantime, its remaining task force is lost. They don't know where the hell the last carrier is. And they know it's a problem because, well, the Yorktown's on fire. It's got a list of about 30 degrees. Or, here, let me make it realistic. Not like that. So imagine landing on that. Probably not the easiest thing if you're a pilot. Yeah, so it was essentially out of commission for all intents and purposes. They, I believe they evacuated the ship, all that good stuff. The personnel went to the various destroyers or cruisers that were around. And these two guys up here, Task Force 17, I do believe, was still trying to locate or relocate the location of the fourth carrier. Fourth carrier is pissed. They launch another attack. And they're looking for another carrier now because as far as they know, there's only two. Right? According to their count, there's only two. So if they get another one, hell, they've won this by the skin of their teeth. Sure enough, sure the hell enough, they find a carrier that's underway, a carrier that doesn't have any huge problems, no smoke coming off, there's no fires. They found an undamaged carrier. Oh, they messed it up bad. They got it. It's in bad shape now. It's definitely hosed and then, but if they didn't know it was the Yorktown, still that badass Yorktown. Yeah, it took another beating and it's sitting there flaming again. They all their crew managed to actually put it back together again and get it underway and stop the smoking. I guess they flooded the fuel lines with CO2. They stopped the list with some counter flooding. So yeah, man, they saved it, and then it got fucked up again. Yeah, dude, it was not pretty. So now, yeah, they ended up really evacuating the ship. It was definitely hosed now as far as they were concerned. But it's not over yet. Kind of. At least for this battle portion, it is. And by the time that happened, well, the United States was able to finally locate the last carrier. And yeah, again, the Enterprise is what launched the last boom. So I don't know where the hell the Hornets guys were, through all of this, but Not that successfully, if you ask me, because all the successful carrier hits, I do believe, came from Yorktown as well as Enterprise. Hornet had a squadron that very famously, I believe, was first VT8. They got crushed, just absolutely crushed. Or they were one of the first VT8, and that's the squadron that Ensign Gay was in. Um, yeah, it was not pretty. A lot of stories behind that too. But at any rate, they finally got this last carrier. They hit it with, I believe, 3 bombs, set it on fire, and yeah, that was all she wrote. Because the rest of the fleet, so to speak, they thought, hell, well, they were pissed. So they're going to send in all those battleships after them. Now, the United States, if you were them, would you stick around for all that? No, I ain't got to worry about that. So they turned tail and they started making some distance. And then in the morning or early in the morning, it became clear to Yamamoto that, yeah, he had he'd been duped. The, how could it not be any more obvious to him and the leadership that the code had been compromised? The U.S. military was waiting for him, caught him in an ambush, and absolutely caught him with their pants down. And then, yeah, went full non-Vaseline. I mean, we're talking, it was bad. It didn't put the Japanese military or the Japanese Navy out of business permanently or anything like that, but um, yeah, there wasn't a whole lot of offense from them the rest of the way. There was some here and there. They were trying, but they were dying. This was a severe turning point in the Battle of the Pacific. Again, the Battle of Midway. After it became obvious, they ended up canceling their landing, even though they probably still had enough naval assets to, bombard Midway. They didn't believe they had enough, uh, you know, air cover to do anything, and eventually they knew they were going to deal with more air issues, from the existing carriers, etc. So it was called off around 2 or 3 in the morning, and that was all she wrote. The U.S. walked away with 2 carriers and turning the tide of World War II. Japanese walked away with 4 carriers less, maybe a couple of cruisers damaged here and there, but it was really the loss of the planes, the crews, and everything attached to the carriers, which made the Kido Butai the most fearsome fighting force in the world up to that point. It was the loss of the experience there that ultimately probably doomed them between that and the United States' ability to ramp up and complete production versus the rather paltry capabilities of Japan to do the same. Them losing as much leverage as they had so fast. Like I said, they really weren't able to take too much of an offensive stance much anywhere the rest of World War II. That's why so many people consider the Battle of Midway so pivotal, so important, and so stuck in my head that I had to do it with action figures and models. And geez, I hope that that was even close to amusing enough for anybody to watch. But if you don't, great. Or if you want to hate it, great. I don't care. I still had fun doing it. I'm sure I missed a lot. I'm sitting here with no script whatsoever off the top of my head. If you're able to learn something, by all means, tune into some of the higher production values around this particular engagement. It's fascinating on so many levels, and hell, I'm still knee deep in it. I just started reading, a book in reference to it. Hell, I haven't read a book in years. It probably sounds like it. But at any rate, thanks for sticking around. Hope you enjoyed or learned or both. And if not, well, hell, why did you do this to yourself? All right. I'd tell you to like and enjoy, but I know there's no chance. And truth be told, I really don't care. All right. Peace.